This afternoon to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of Dennis Brooks. Dennis's family so very much appreciates your presence here with them, which offers them a great deal of comfort and respect. Adonai ma'adam v'teda ehu ben enosh v'achashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, "Return, you mortal creatures." Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. The author of the first of the Bible's 150 Psalms describes for us, in language that is both poignant and succinct, the nature of the good life and the fruits of that life. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked, or taken the path of sinners, or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight, and they study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose foliage never fades and whose fruit always flourishes. Before we read the 23rd Psalm together, I want to make a couple of comments about it. It is certainly one of the greatest of all poems in any language, and deservedly famous. In a short 55 words in the Hebrew, it describes a powerful, complex worldview, which combines realism and idealism. The psalmist does not shrink from the problems of life, death, and the fear of death, God's rod, one of the connotations of which might be that our deeds are remembered, and that we pay for some of the more negative actions that we engage in. And also there are people who don't like us. There are adversaries in life, and we have to face that fact. But in spite of these elements of the realities of life, the psalmist is optimistic. The first 4 words in Hebrew, 9 words in the English translation: Adonai ro'i, the Lord is my shepherd; lo echsar, I shall not want. And whether the sheep acknowledges the shepherd is there. Whether we understand that literally or metaphorically, we have a great deal to be thankful for in our lives. And the psalmist acknowledges and specifies that as well. Let's recite the 23rd Psalm together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kohelet, the traditional author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Dennis Brooks died this past Sunday at the age of 87. He lived a long and productive life, and those who loved and admired him will miss him. Dennis was born and raised in Cleveland, graduated from Shaker Heights High School, and went on to receive his bachelor's degree from Harvard University. After Harvard, Dennis matriculated at the Western Reserve Medical School here in Cleveland, where he received his MD. Following his residency in orthopedics and a pediatric orthopedic fellowship in Indianapolis, Dennis served as a physician in the Air Force for 2 years in Tucson, Arizona, before joining an adult orthopedics practice here in Cleveland, where he remained for more than 30 years. There he specialized in, as he liked to say, knees and backs. Along the way, Dennis became interested in the intersection of law and medicine. And so he went to law school for 6 months in order to be better equipped to help his patients with the legal questions that might arise in the course of their treatment. When he retired from his practice, Dennis continued to train orthopedists, young orthopedists, at the VA hospital in order to stay active in his field and to be able to pass on the fruit of his vast experience to the young doctors entering that field. In sum, Dennis Brooks had a rich career in his chosen field and made many contributions both to the well-being of his patients and to the field itself. When I met with Dennis's family this past Wednesday afternoon, I began by asking them about Dennis the person, his attributes, his interests, and his involvements beyond his professional life. And here I discovered a person who was both personally complex as well as deeply curious about so many things. Now, those of you who knew Dennis well know that he was, and here I quote the first thing that his family told me about him, that Dennis was a curmudgeon. At this point, I'm going to resist defining that word so as to allow each of you to create your own mental picture of Dennis Brooks, the curmudgeon. But clearly, Dennis had his opinions, and he seemed to have no trouble expressing them without hesitation or equivocation. Were you to utter, God forbid, something grammatically improper, Dennis had no trouble calling you on it. When he ate at a restaurant that was for him too noisy, he also had no trouble declaiming that I am never coming back. Outspoken, unguarded, no filter, this and more was part of who Dennis Brooks was. But in addition, Dennis had a curious mind and a passion for knowledge. He loved watching Jeopardy for the facts that show brought to light in the course of the competition. He was a collector of fine pens and pipes. In fact, Dennis not only collected more than 300 pipes, but he also meticulously cleaned and restored each of them. Dennis also taught himself the art of calligraphy, one of the motives of which was to correct, in some small way, the well-entrenched idea that physicians had bad handwriting. Now, although Dennis was not a religious person in the conventional sense, at least. He was deeply committed to Judaism and to his synagogue. He took Hebrew classes at the temple and, in fact, had 2 bar mitzvahs, more than 60 years apart. The first one at the traditional age of 13, and his second one at the age of 75. Indeed, his temple was always an important part of his life, and he had a very close relationship with Rabbi Daniel Jeremy Silver of blessed memory. And especially later in life, he turned to his religion for its cultural and ritual values and practices. Indeed, when he couldn't attend services in person, he would watch them on live stream. And he and Laura once spent 3 weeks in Israel teaching English to Israelis. This trip made an indelible impact on Dennis, and Dennis and you, Laura, made friends with whom you remained in touch. Dennis Brooks is survived by his wife of 38 years, Laura, who, according to one of her friends, and I quote, changed Dennis's life. Dennis is also survived by his daughters, Lori, Allison, and Jennifer, by his brother, Jeffrey, by his sons-in-law, Jim and Bill, and his sister-in-law, Ellen, by his grandchildren, Alexandra, Stephanie, Nick, Megan, and Zach, by many nieces, nephews, grandnieces, and grandnephews, and by his grand puppy, Remington. He was predeceased by his parents, Louis and May, by his son-in-law, Charles, by his ex-wife, Barbara, and by his grandpuppy, Jake. At this point, the family wants to express its deepest appreciation to Dennis's wonderful caregiver and special friend, Sarah. Dennis Brooks lived a long and a purposeful life. He contributed to his profession, helped to raise his fine children, and he lived to see the arrival and flourishing of his grandchildren. Those who loved and admired him will never forget him. Zichrono livracha. We will always remember Dennis Brooks. Amen. I now want to call on 2 people who will reflect on the life, the qualities, the accomplishments of Dennis Brooks. First, his daughter, Allison.
I want to thank all of you for being here today. As most of you know, my childhood with my dad was rocky at best. There were some good times mixed in, but honestly, I don't remember most of my childhood. However, there were a few great memories that stand out. I loved working in his office because I was so proud that my dad was an orthopedic surgeon. Anytime my friends or classmates went to see him as a patient, they would always tell me how kind he was. I also loved being invited into his den at home and watching him work. I was fascinated looking at medical books, even though you'd turn the page and see a disfigured face or an arm hanging there, but I felt like it brought me just a little bit closer to my dad. Another great memory was when he smoked his pipe. He loved to make smoke rings, and I would try to poke my fingers through them. We would laugh together, and that just gave me comfort and peace that he was happy. Any time now that I smell pipe tobacco, I think of him and a smile passes my face. My favorite memory was playing backgammon with him. I can still see the shades of brown on the beautiful backgammon board. I can even hear the dice shake in the leather shaker cup and feel the slam of the dice on the beautifully hand-carved board. I'm very grateful that over the last few years, while he wasn't healthy, we spent much more time together and connected at a much deeper level. I was able to learn about him, his upbringing, and what made him who he was, and he learned more about me because I finally was brave enough to speak up. I told him many times how grateful I was for him, that he was my dad and thanked him for all that he did for me. I now realize my childhood with him molded me to become who I am today, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And I want to add a personal thank you again for Sarah, because she has the biggest heart and took such good care for him for the last 8 months. And I really, really appreciate you. I love you, Dad.
I now want to call on a very good, longtime friend of Dennis's, Steve Albert.
Am I situated here? Yeah. It always looks worse than it is getting into place, but I was asked to give some remarks, and I have a great deal of gratitude for the offer, and I listened to the rabbi reference Dennis's efforts at medical school, which were long and interesting and was the foundation for a great medical career, and also his interest in law, where he spent 6 months in law school and continued in working with the Bar Association as well as the Medical Association in bringing together the two professions. And in the profession of law, there is a subcategory of lawyers that are called trial lawyers. They are the people who usually couldn't find a niche in any other part of the law, so they got the opportunity to call themselves trial lawyers. And they would think of themselves as people who resolve disputes by trying cases for the parties. And part of a trial is a closing argument. And the closing argument is designed in order to allow the lawyers to sum up the evidence to make their case for their client. And I was thinking, because of the combination of the circumstances here, medicine, law, and the relationship of soul and God, that I would say a few words in terms of closing remarks, which lawyers usually talk about as the remarks they prepared for the closing arguments, the remarks they then delivered, and then later on the remarks they thought they should have delivered. The ones I'm delivering are here. I will record later the ones that were better and I thought of tomorrow. The point of the matter is this. There is two ways to prove a case. One is through direct evidence and one is through circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is when you aren't there and can't prove it directly, and that's circumstantial evidence. And then direct evidence is when you have personal knowledge of the situation. And so in terms of thinking about a soul, which I believe people have, I have thought, in order to prove the case here, that all we have to do is think about the birth of a newborn baby, or the beauty of a sunrise or a sunset, or the holding of a hand of a loved one, or reflecting on the life of a loved one. And we would know that there is circumstantial evidence that would demonstrate there is something much greater than ourselves that caused all this to be. And we can call that a spirit or God. And then there is direct evidence with respect to the soul, and that is from what you may know of a person. And I had 38 years of a deep personal and loving friendship with Dennis, and I can attest, as they say, they call it vouching in the law, but that's not a good thing. But I can attest that Dennis had a beautiful soul, and it was demonstrated in, among other things, not all, his integrity, his good character, his work ethic, as the rabbi said, a deep curiosity, and a faith that was without doubt and without questioning. And these two things allow me to say that for certain, Dennis's soul will be going to God. And we don't know exactly how that all happens. It can't be proved by direct evidence, but there is plenty of circumstantial evidence to prove my case. And I can tell you this, that Dennis will be in a place where those who can hear my voice, who are here because they cared for him, those who loved him and knew him well, will one day join with him in a place where we know it's there, and we hope to be there to be reunited with him. And we also know for sure that the passing of Dennis has left a deep hole in our hearts. And we know from experience that God will provide us with the sustenance and the ability to fill that hole so that we have the ability to move forward knowing Dennis is with us here, and that Dennis's eternity will be established without doubt through his lovely children, his wife, his family, and his dear friends, and that will be an eternity for generations to come. So I would think that we are all proud and privileged to be here today to celebrate Dennis's life, and to know that there will be more to come at some time in the future, and we will join again with him then. Thank you.
Two beautiful and moving testimonies. Thank you. Thank you. O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. As you are able, I invite you to rise now for the Eo Mole Rachamim. Eo Mole Rachamim, Shochein Bam Romim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kadoshim Utahorim Kazohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Yakirenu Shahalach La'olamo, Bala Rachamim Yastireo B'Sefer Kanafav La'olamim, V'Yitzror Bitzror HaChayim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato V'Yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Dennis Brooks, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say together, Amen. You may be seated. I want to announce that the family of Dennis Brooks will receive friends at Congregation Mishkan Or, the synagogue at 26,000 Shaker Boulevard, just east of Richmond Road, today after the interment service and until 6 o'clock. Once again, Congregation Mishkan or 26,000 Shaker Boulevard, today immediately after our interment service. Our service now continues at graveside at the Mayfield Cemetery. Once again, thank you so much for your presence here with us this afternoon, which offers us a great deal of comfort and support. This concludes our service.